Hey guys, I'm Chase at Rocky Mountain ATV and these are my top 5 tips for better braking technique. All right guys, so today we want to share with you 5 tips that are going to help you with your braking technique. And it doesn't matter what type of rider you are. If you like to go out and ride in the desert, if you're riding the track like we are today, these tips are really going to help you out. You have to remember that braking and braking technique is crucial if you want to become a faster and better rider. So that's what we're going to share with you today. So tip number 1 is just basically your brake setup. So with your brake lever and your brake pedal, you just want to make sure they're in a good, comfortable spot for you. Now, every rider is going to be a little bit different. There is no perfect location for your brake lever or for your brake pedal, but you definitely want to make sure that it's in a comfortable position. So for your brake lever, I usually have mine pointed just a little bit down, so whether I'm in the seated or standing position, I have a good flat line from the back of my hand to my finger to the brake lever. And then with the brake pedal, I usually have mine even with the foot peg. It's what most riders will do. But if you like to have it up or down a little bit, that's not a big issue. But you just want to make sure that you're comfortable with your brake setup. Now going along with that, okay, if your brake lever is bent up or if it's broken, okay, I see a lot of riders riding with that, just go out and get a new brake lever. It's just going to feel more comfortable. And again, you just want to have a really comfortable setup. So make sure everything's in good shape. Look at your brake rotors. Make sure your rotors are good condition as well as your brake pads. A lot of riders overlook the brake pad condition, but brake pads and your rotor condition have a lot to do with the performance of your brakes. So that's gonna be my first tip, is just make sure that your levers, your brake pedal, your rotor, your brake pads, everything's in a good spot and in good condition. So our second tip is with braking ratios. Now what we mean by this is how much pressure you're applying to the front brake and the rear brake. Now believe it or not, a lot of riders get this confused, but most of your stopping power should be coming from your front brake. In fact, what we say is about 70-30. In other words, 70% of your stopping power should be coming from the front brake and 30% coming from the rear. The rear brake is really there just to help slow or help stabilize the bike and to help steer it from the rear, but most of your stopping power is gonna be coming from the front. But as you're learning to ride and you're getting used to it, okay, a lot of riders get nervous when they're using the front brake because they end up driving too much, they tuck the front and they push. So what we recommend is you're starting out, okay, whether you're at the desert or the track, is swap those ratios. So start out with 30% braking with, or 70% braking with the rear and 30% with the front. And then as you get better, as you get faster, more comfortable, start to increase the amount of pressure you use with your front brake and decrease the amount you use with your rear. Because remember, most of your braking power is going to come from your front. So that's going to be our second tip, is your braking ratios with your rear and your front brake. All right guys, so tip number 3 is body positioning while you're braking, and this is very, very important. You gotta remember, like we just talked about, that most of your braking is gonna come from your front brake. But also, when you use your front brake, you gotta remember that all that mass, all that momentum is pushing the bike forward, which really weights the front. And so if your weight is too far forward, that will cause to feel like the forks are diving and they'll wanna tuck on you. So it's very important that as you're accelerating, your chest is over the front of the bike, but as you start to transition to your braking, what you wanna do is shift your weight back and have it neutral or even more towards the rear of the bike. That way, as you're braking, you're getting that weight going forward, but you're counterbalancing that with your body. And while you're doing that, very important, you're squeezing with your ankles all the way up to your knees on the frame of the bike. That's gonna help control the bike. But remember, accelerate with your chest over the bike, but as you brake, you're gonna transition back, balance the bike, and that's gonna be your braking position right here, is with your hips back and your chest about centered over the seat. And that's a good braking position, again, to keep a good balance with the bike. So that's tip number 3, is have a good balance, a good body position while you're braking. All right, so 4th tip is when to let off the brakes. If you've ever watched pros ride, okay, they look like they're going slow sometimes. They don't even look like they're really trying, but that's because they're carrying a lot of momentum through the turns, and it's very important that you don't want to be touching your brakes while you're in the turns. You want to do all your braking before you get in. That way you can set up and carry a lot of momentum through the turn. So a rule that I like to have is called the rule of 10s. And this was taught to me by pro riders. What you want to do is you want to have all your braking done at least 10 feet before you enter a turn. That way you're off the brakes and you're ready to get set up and enter the turn, whether you're sitting down with your leg out or you're standing up. That way you're not upsetting the bike, because while you're in the turn, if you touch your brakes while you're in the turn, most likely you're going to unsettle the bike and you're not going to be fluid or smooth and fast going through that rut. So what you want to do is pick a spot about 10 feet before the rut or the turn that you're coming into and use that spot as a marker. So every time you get to that spot, it tells you, okay, let off the brakes. Or maybe you're coming into a turn, you get a lot of braking bumps. Find a braking bump that is just before the turn starts or the rut and use that braking bump as a reminder to let off the brakes each time in that same spot. And that way you're consistent as you're coming through. So again, the rule of 10s, 10 feet before you enter the turn, you want to be off the brakes, set up for the turn, and then 10 feet before you exit the rut is when you want to start to accelerate and get on the gas and drive out. And actually a really good drill that I used to do, in fact, I could still be doing it, is you want to see if you can carry enough momentum to go all the way through a turn so you enter the rut and you go all the way out without touching the gas. If you can do that, that means you're not on the brakes and you have enough momentum to carry your speed through. So it's a really good drill, but that's gonna be my fourth tip, is you wanna be 10 feet before you enter a turn, you wanna be off the brakes and carry more momentum through. All right, so tip number 5 is know the limits of your brakes. And what I mean by that is you wanna be able to know basically how hard you can squeeze your front brake or use your brake pedal before your brakes will start to lock up. So what I recommend is just go out to a flat spot and accelerate hard, and then once you reach a certain point, you can put a rock or a cone out, but you just want to test how hard you can squeeze that brake before you start to lock up the front tire, and the same goes for the rear. And that way, when you're riding and you get on the brakes, you have a good sense of how hard you can or you should be squeezing the brake. And that's just going to give you more confidence as you're braking because you know the limits of what you have. So that's tip number 5, is know the limits of your brakes. Now I got a little bonus tip for you. You actually have 3 brakes on your bike. You got your front brake, your rear brake, and then you also have your engine braking. Now engine braking is when you downshift on your bike, and you probably felt this before if you're not familiar with it, but as you downshift, you'll feel that your bike naturally just slow down. That's your engine braking. And engine braking can be used when you're on the track or when you're out in the desert. So if normally you come into a turn and you're in 3rd gear and you're used to squeezing the clutch and getting on the brakes hard, well, what you can do is actually just downshift 1 gear, depending on how fast you're going to what gear you're in, and that's gonna help slow down the bike more, and you won't have to be as aggressive on the brakes. And also downshifting is just gonna set you up for the next turn. Now, if you're on a 2-stroke, you guys are kind of out of luck because 2-strokes naturally just don't have much engine braking, but for 4 strokes, engine braking is really awesome to use. All right, guys, so those are my top 5 tips to help you with better braking technique. Now, get out there, doesn't matter what type of riding you're doing, these are gonna help you out. Now, if you have some tips that you'd like to share, well, make sure you write those below. If you need new brake levers, head over to RockyMountainATVMC.com to pick those up along with all the other parts and accessories you need. If you guys like this top 5 tips video and you wanna see more like it, make sure to get subscribed to our YouTube channel because we got a lot coming down the pipe. I'm Chase with Rocky Mountain, thanks for watching.